Okay, these are great ones to do because as people came and asked me, I had some students asking me some questions and couldn't necessarily make sense of why the answers were what they were in the book. And there were some pretty interesting confusions. So they say angle JAC. Angle JAC is this particular angle right there. Okay. There are other angles that involve those three letters. For example, CJA, that angle, or say AJC, that angle. But just because they have the same letters doesn't mean they're in the correct order. A is the vertex point, right? Because it's the middle letter. So we're talking about J to A to C and D to A to C. Those two angles. Do we know that they are congruent? Well, nothing that I see tells me that there's anything that they're congruent. Just because these angles are doesn't mean that has anything to do with what's going on here. Now, if we knew that this perfectly dropped straight down, cutting this side, bisecting this side, and cutting it into two equal parts, then we would know, then yes, that must be true. There's a rule that we're going to use, a theorem that we're going to get to way later in the year that states that. But we're not told that. We're not told that this side is equal in length to this side. So there's nothing that, no angle marks or anything that lead us to believe that this angle and this angle have the same measure. So the question is asking, can you make a conclusion from the information? And I would say, no, nothing given uh, states they are congruent. Sorry for the sloppiness. Okay. There's no marks. There's no, for example, angle marks that would say that. Okay. So if you say, yeah, I kind of feel it, it kind of looks like it, um, math doesn't go on your vibes. It doesn't, oh man, it just feels right to me. That's not how it works. You need to justify what you know based on given information or information that you can conclude from given information. Okay? So just because they kind of look the same, that's not how we do our math. We need mathematical uh, information that demonstrates it. So continuing on. Next two angles, angle JCA, J to C to A, and angle A to C to D, added together equal 180. Well, this we are allowed to conclude. This line down here at the bottom that makes them, this is one special thing that they tell us in math that we're allowed to do. If this appears to be a straight line, then we can treat it as such. Okay? The straight lines, straight angles can be treated as straight angles. Um, we're just allowed to make that assumption in math. Okay, so you can make that leap, and then so can we. So then that angle and that angle, because they form a linear pair, we do. Um, and the way that the book might explain it, that is that they form a linear pair. But you also need to know that we're allowed to assume a straight angle, something that appears to be straight is straight. Okay, so I'm going to write yes, they form a linear pair. And even though I'm not stating it, the reason that I can say that they form a linear pair is because I'm allowed to assume that this is straight across. Okay, so kind of weird rule that is just one of the few things you're allowed to assume from the visual demonstration of the diagram. Okay, now C is the midpoint of JD. So segment JD is running along here. And C is the midpoint of it. Well, I know that it appears that it's kind of landing in the middle, but we are not told that the, that the two segments that are formed, JC and CD, we are not told that they are congruent or equal in measure. If they wanted to tell us that, they would have had to either give us angle marks, or rather segment marks like that, or something to indicate that they are of equal measure. And they didn't do that, so there's no reason to conclude that C is smack in the middle. Okay? So we can say no, and just say that the two segments are not marked as congruent. The segments aren't marked as congruent. Because if they wanted us to know that they were congruent, they'd have to tell us that, or give us some information that would lead us to believe it, and we don't actually have any information to believe that. Okay? And finally, and let's erase these marks from here. Finally, the question is EAF and JAD are vertical angles. Well, let's take a look. Remember, we're allowed to assume that things that appear straight are straight. So I'm going to then say, okay, then that means that I could draw a line here along there, and I could draw another line along there. And guess what? We carve out those two angles. We carve out from the, if this point right here was basically splitting those two lines into opposite rays, then those rays would be forming one of the angles, and the rays opposite them would be forming the other angle. So angle EAF and angle JAD appear to be formed by two lines that are crossing over, and that's what vertical angles are. So I would say that yes, and they want us to justify how we know it. I would say yes, the angles are formed by those two lines. The angles are formed by, what are the two lines? By line JF and line ED. Yeah, so I'm going to go with that.